History is often written by the victors, but the map of Europe was redrawn by a child born to the vanquished. Before he was the emperor of the French, before he was the scourge of kings, he was merely a boy born on a rock in the Mediterranean, screaming in a dialect that no one in Paris could understand. To understand the man, one must first understand the wound that birthed him. The year was 1769, and the air of Corsica was thick with the scent of wild thyme and the copper tang of blood. For centuries, this rugged island of granite peaks and azure coasts had been a possession of the Republic of Genoa, but the winds of change were blowing violently across the Mediterranean. The French king, Louis XV, seeking to secure his dominance over the sea, purchased the island as if it were nothing more than a parcel of land, ignoring the fierce pride of its inhabitants. The Corsicans, led by the patriot Pasquale Paoli, rose in desperate rebellion, fighting not for glory, but for their very existence against the encroaching French battalions. In the midst of this chaos, a young woman named Letizia Ramolino rode through the mountains, her belly heavy with a child who would shake the world. She was not a delicate court lady, but a woman of steel, accompanying her husband Carlo Bonaparte to the front lines, breathing in the smoke of muskets in the dust of retreat. The decisive blow fell at the Battle of Ponte Novo, where the Corsican resistance was shattered by the superior discipline of the French army, forcing Paoli into exile and leaving the island under the absolute rule of the Bourbon monarchy. The dream of a free republic died in the river gorges, and the reality of occupation settled like a shroud over the valleys. It was in this atmosphere of defeat and resentment that Letizia returned to her ancestral home in Ajaccio. On the Feast of the Assumption, the 15th day of August, while attending Mass at the cathedral, she felt the first pangs of labor and rushed home, barely reaching the sofa in her parlor before the child arrived. He was born on a carpet woven with scenes from the Iliad, a silent prophecy for a life that would rival the epics of old. They named him Napoleone, a name as Italian as the blood that coursed through his veins. He entered the world not as a French citizen, but as a subject of a foreign conquest, crying out in a house that mourned the loss of its liberty. This was the first paradox of his life. For the man who would one day embody the soul of France was born hating the very flag he would eventually carry to the ends of the earth. The molding of a conqueror begins not in the lecture hall, but at the hearth. And for the young Napoleone, the hearth was a place of stark contrasts, governed by two opposing forces that would war within his soul for the rest of his days. Dominating his early world was his mother, Letizia, a woman of Roman virtue and frightening austerity. She was beautiful, with severe features and eyes that missed nothing. But it was her will that truly defined her. She did not coddle her children with soft words or idle indulgences. Instead, she raised them with the discipline of a Spartan general, believing that pain was something to be endured in silence and that weakness was a vice. She often told him that poverty was not a shame but a challenge, and she managed the family's meager finances with a ruthlessness that kept them afloat in turbulent times. It was from her that he inherited his legendary stamina, his capacity for endless work, and that peculiar cold pragmatism that allowed him to sacrifice thousands of men for a strategic advantage without blinking. She was the anchor, the rock, the unyielding force that taught him the world owed him nothing. In sharp relief to this stoic matriarch stood his father, Carlo Bonaparte, a man of charm, elegance, and fluid loyalties. Carlo had fought for independence alongside Paoli, wearing the uniform of the resistance, but when the French victory became absolute, he did not choose exile or martyrdom. He chose survival. Seeing that the only path to prosperity for his growing brood lay in cooperation with the conquerors, Carlo shed his revolutionary skin and donned the velvet coat of a French courtier. He learned the language of the occupier, ingratiated himself with the French governor, and spent the family's dwindling fortune on trips to Versailles, seeking titles and scholarships. To the young, idealistic Napoleone, who worshipped the memory of the exiled Paoli as a god. This transformation was a source of profound confusion and unspoken resentment. He saw his father's bowing and scraping as a humiliation, a betrayal of their Corsican blood for the favor of a foreign king. Yet he could not deny that it was this very flexibility that put food on their table. Life in Ajaccio was a wild, untamed existence, far removed from the polished salons his father aspired to enter. The boy ran effectively wild in the steep, sun-baked streets, leading gangs of local children in violent skirmishes where stones replaced musket balls. He was small, scrawny, and ill-kempt, with stockings always falling down around his ankles, but his temper was volcanic. He fought with a ferocity that terrified boys twice his size, biting and scratching to assert his dominance, driven by a burning need to be first, to be obeyed. He spoke only the coarse Corsican dialect, a rough tongue suited for shouting across valleys, knowing not a single word of the elegant French he would one day use to dictate the laws of Europe. He was a creature of the island, feral and proud, unaware that his father's diplomatic maneuvering had already sealed his fate. The papers were signed, the scholarships secured, and the wild hawk of Ajaccio was about to be caged in a cold, gray land he had been taught to view as the enemy. The severing of the root is a violent act, and for the 9-year-old Napoleone, it came with the brutality of a sudden frost that kills the vine. In the winter of 1779, he was torn from the sun-drenched cliffs of Ajaccio, from the embrace of his formidable mother, and shipped across a gray, heaving sea to a land that felt less like a new home and more like a prison. The journey itself was a purgatory of seasickness and dread, but arrival was worse. He was deposited at the Royal Military School of Brienne-le-Château, situated in the flat, desolate plains of Champagne, a region where the sky seemed perpetually weeping, and the fog clung to the earth like wet wool. The school itself was a grim, monastic edifice of cold stone and long, echoing corridors, run by the Minim friars, where the air always smelled of damp plaster and boiled cabbage. It was a world devoid of color, devoid of warmth, and most devastatingly, devoid of love. From the moment he stepped into the courtyard, clutching his meager belongings, he realized he was utterly alone. He was a foreigner, an alien specimen dropped into a petri dish of French aristocratic privilege. His classmates were the sons of dukes, counts, and marquises, boys who had known only silk and servants since birth, their speech polished and their manners exquisite. They looked at this small, olive-skinned boy with his wild, unpowdered hair and ill-fitting clothes not with curiosity, but with the instinctive cruelty of a pack spotting a wounded animal. When he opened his mouth to speak, the disaster was absolute. He could barely string together a sentence in French, and what little he could manage was choked by a thick, guttural Corsican accent that made his words sound harsh and barbaric to their refined ears. They laughed openly, pointing fingers and mimicking his rough cadence, turning his very identity into a joke. The greatest humiliation, however, was reserved for his name. To these high-born boys, Bonaparte sounded comically foreign, a peasant name unworthy of their presence. They twisted it, mangled it, and finally baptized him with a cruel nickname that would haunt him for years, paille au nez, meaning straw in the nose. It was a nonsensical insult, but its power lay in the collective sneer with which it was delivered. Every time he heard it echoed in the refectory or whispered in the dormitories, it was a reminder that he did not belong, that he was a savage among gentlemen. He saw his father's ambition now in a terrible new light. Carlo had not secured a future for his son, but had thrown him into a lion's den armed only with pride. Surrounded by wealth he could not fathom and arrogance he could not abide, the young boy retreated into a shell of icy silence, his heart hardening against the country that had taken his island and was now trying to break his spirit. When the world denies you a place at the table, you must build your own sanctuary. And for the isolated cadet, that sanctuary was constructed within the walls of a library. Rejected by his peers and mocked for his poverty, Napoleon retreated into a fortress of silence where no insults could reach him. He ceased trying to court the favor of the French aristocrats, realizing that their disdain was a wall he could not scale. So he turned his back on the playground and buried his face in books. He found his true companions not among the living, but among the dead, the giants of antiquity who whispered to him of glory, honor, and the rise and fall of empires. He read Plutarch with a voracious hunger, consuming the lives of the noble Greeks and Romans as if they were personal letters addressed to him. In the solitude of the reading room, he was no longer the scrawny Corsican charity case. He was Alexander marching to the Indus. He was Caesar crossing the Rubicon. He was a titan in a world of pygmies. These ancient heroes became his fathers, his brothers, and his only friends, teaching him that greatness was not a matter of birthright, but of will. It was during one particularly harsh winter that the dormant genius within him first flared into visible existence, transforming a childish game into a glimpse of the terror he would one day unleash upon Europe. Snow had fallen heavily upon Brienne, disrupting the usual routines, and the students gathered in the courtyard to engage in a chaotic snowball fight. But Napoleon did not simply throw snow. He saw the chaotic melee and instinctively imposed order upon it. He organized the students into companies, appointed lieutenants, and designed a complex system of fortifications, complete with bastions and defensive walls. He stood atop his ice rampart, arms crossed, barking orders with a cold authority that silenced the mockery of his tormentors. For the first time, the sons of counts and dukes obeyed the son of a minor clerk, not out of affection, but out of recognition of a superior command. He directed the attacks with mathematical precision, flanking his enemies and calculating angles of fire, his eyes burning with a strange, intense light. It was only a game, yet in that frozen courtyard, the hierarchy of the school was momentarily inverted, and the masters watching from the windows felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. This incident marked a profound shift in his trajectory, for he had discovered the one weapon that could level the playing field against the aristocracy: his intellect. He realized that while he could not compete with their lineage or their wealth, he could crush them with his mind. He threw himself into mathematics with a fanaticism that bordered on obsession, finding in the clean, absolute logic of numbers a refuge from the messy, prejudiced world of human social standing. Mathematics did not care about his accent. Geometry did not mock his poverty. In the realm of equations, he was a king. He mastered complex problems that baffled his instructors, earning a grudging respect that slowly replaced the open ridicule. The savage boy from the Maquis was dying, shedding his skin to reveal the calculator, the strategist, the engineer. He was still alone, still resentful, and still desperately poor. But he was no longer a victim. He was a loaded cannon, waiting for the spark that would allow him to fire. Destiny often arrives not with a fanfare of trumpets, but with the hollow thud of a coffin lid closing. In February of 1785, a letter arrived from Montpellier that would shatter the fragile equilibrium of the Bonaparte family. Carlo, the charming, scheming, ambitious father who had gambled everything on French integration, was dead at the age of 38, his stomach consumed by the same hereditary cancer that would one day stalk his son. For Napoleon, then a cadet at the École Militaire in Paris, the news was a catastrophe that transcended grief. He was 15 years old, thousands of miles from home, and suddenly, the weight of a destitute family crashed onto his narrow shoulders. The illusion of noble comfort evaporated. He realized with a terrifying clarity that he was now the patriarch, the provider, the sole hope for a mother and 7 siblings drowning in debt. The time for childhood games was over. The time for survival had begun. Driven by a desperation that few of his wealthy classmates could comprehend, Napoleon accelerated his studies with a ferocity that alarmed his instructors. He could not afford the luxury of a full education. Every extra month at the academy was a drain on the family's non-existent coffers. He condensed 2 years of grueling artillery training into one, sleeping only a few hours a night, his mind a burning furnace of ballistics, geometry, and fortification. He did not eat with the others. He did not socialize. He was a man possessed, racing against the specter of poverty. When the final examinations came, he passed 42nd out of 58 candidates. Not a brilliant rank, but a miraculous one for a boy who had rushed through the curriculum in half the time, fighting exhaustion and grief every step of the way. He received his commission as a second lieutenant in the Lafayette Artillery Regiment, a prestigious corps where intellect mattered more than pedigree. At 16, he donned the blue uniform with red facings, finally a man in the eyes of the world. He was impossibly young to carry a sword, looking more like a child playing dress-up than an officer of the king. He was thin, his hair lank and unpowdered, his boots worn, and his pockets empty. Yet, as he packed his meager trunk for his first posting in Valence, a strange transformation had taken place. The boy who had arrived in France weeping for his mother was gone. In his place stood a silent, brooding young man hardened by 6 years of exile and mockery. He had entered the system to survive it, and he had emerged with the keys to its destruction. He was a French officer now, sworn to serve Louis XVI, but in the secret chambers of his heart, he remained a Corsican, an outsider, a silent observer watching the cracks form in the monarchy's foundation. The winds of the revolution were beginning to gather on the horizon, and the young lieutenant, hungry and ambitious, was ready to step into the storm.